During a stormy night in the ER, a black nurse breaks protocol to save a dying patient. By morning, she's fired. No one thanks her. No one defends her. But what started as silence erupts into a fight for justice the hospital never saw coming. Watch to see how one moment of courage changes everything. Tell us, where in the world are you watching from? And what time of day is it right now? Rain battered the windows of St. Vincent Hospital in thick, fast drops that made it impossible to see past the emergency room doors. Wind howled through the cracks in the old building, and the overhead lights flickered every few minutes, reminding everyone inside just how fragile the night felt. Katie Bradley, a seasoned ER nurse, tightened the collar of her scrub jacket and moved through the hallway with practiced focus. She had worked dozens of storm shifts before, but something about tonight made her chest feel tight. Maybe it was the pressure in the air. Maybe it was the way the phones hadn't stopped ringing since she walked in. Whatever it was, she felt it in her bones. Something was coming. Katie wasn't flashy, wasn't crave attention. She did her job with a calm precision, the kind that came from years of repetition, failure, and learning how to keep people alive. She didn't carry herself like a hero, and maybe that's why her patients trusted her. They saw someone who showed up, stayed steady, and didn't flinch. In a hospital where protocol sometimes felt more important than people, Katie still believed in both. She believed in the rules until the rules stopped making sense. Around 8:30, as the staff scrambled to stabilize a stroke victim in Bay 3, and an intoxicated driver screamed obscenities from behind. Security restraints. A sudden voice cut through the noise. Incoming trauma male. Mid-20s, gunshot, wound to the chest. Unresponsive, the paramedics burst through the ER doors, soaked to the bone, and pushing a stretcher fast. One of them shouted over the chaos. Found him, near the naval yard. No ID, no phone, no backup. We had to intubate on the way. The room quieted just slightly as eyes turned toward the stretcher. The patient was white, tall, with close-cut blonde hair and a pale blood-streaked face. His uniform shirt, torn and stained, revealed a gunshot wound high on the stalled right side of his chest, dangerously close to the heart. He wasn't breathing on his own. His body was limp, his skin cold. Sarah Kennedy, the nurse supervisor, stepped in. Her presence alone usually commanded order. A woman in her late 50s with a sharp voice and sharper instincts for administrative survival. Sarah read the paramedic's brief report and lifted her eyes with concern. "Do not touch him," she said. "We need federal clearance. He's in uniform, possibly military. We wait." Katie blinked. "Wait, he has no identification," Sarah snapped. "We don't. I know who he is, or if this involves a federal investigation. If we intervene without clearance, the hospital could be liable." Katie stepped closer to the stretcher. She could see the patient's chest barely rising. The heart monitor showed irregular activity. His blood pressure was crashing. Whatever had happened to him, he didn't have time to wait. "He's actively dying," she said. Her voice was steady but firm. "We need to get him into trauma now. This isn't about paperwork." Sarah crossed her arms. "Then you better be ready to answer for it." No one else moved. A few nurses exchanged glances, torn between training and fear. Katie looked around the room and realized once again that sometimes doing the right thing meant doing it alone. She turned back to the stretcher. "We're rolling him in. Miguel, help me. I need a crash cart prepped in the thoracectomy tray ready. Get Dr. Chen paged right now." Miguel hesitated for only a second before stepping in. The patient was wheeled into the trauma bay, monitors beeping erratically. Blood loss was extensive and signs of a VIFA, collapsed lung, were visible. Katie worked quickly, checking vitals, adjusting the airway tube, and preparing for chest compressions. Dr. Chen arrived, and within minutes, pulling on gloves and assessing the situation fast. Gunshot, wound to the thorax. Let's get an NDD5. Ultrasound. Bradley, update me. Unknown. White male 20 seconds found unresponsive. BP is dropping, heart rate erratic. Entry wound. High, right chest. I think we're dealing with hemothorax and possible pericardial tamponade, she answered, without missing a beat. Okay, let's open Tim up. The next 15 minutes blurred into a life and death rhythm. Blood pulled on the floor as clamps, tubes, and paddles. Every 3 were passed between gloved hands. The room was filled with shouts, alarms, and the raw urgency of trying to pull someone back from the edge. Twice, the heart monitor flatlined. Twice, they shocked him back. Finally, a faint but steady heartbeat returned. The ventilator hissed in rhythm. Katie stood back. Her scrubs soaked her hands, trembling slightly as she peeled off her gloves. Dr. Chen nodded. Good work. He's stable for now. Let's get him to ICU and run labs. Someone call in surgery for review. As the team moved to transfer the patient, Katie leaned down to clear the tangle of lines near his neck. That's when she saw it. A dog tag tucked, half under his collar, almost hidden. She gently pulled it free and read the signed inscription. L. Holmes, U.S. Marine Corps. Her breath caught, so he wasn't just military. He was a Marine, and they had nearly let him die in the hallway because no one wanted to take the first step. She looked up. No one noticed what she held in her hand. No one asked her what it said. Back in the locker room, later, her hands scrubbed raw and her body aching. Katie sat alone. The tag rested on the bench beside her. She could still hear Sarah's voice echoing in her head. If you do this, you better be ready to answer for it. She was, even if she had no idea what the consequences would be, because tonight she hadn't seen a Marine. She hadn't seen a white man. She had seen a patient dying, and that had been enough. The morning after, the storm was quieter, but not calm. Street. Vincent's ER buzzed with the hangover of a long, brutal night. Some of the staff looked worn down. Others moved on. Autopilot, pretending everything was normal. The fluorescent lights hummed steadily. This time no flickering, no chaos. But something else hung in the illume air. Katie Bradley walked into the break room where she'd left her jacket, and the night before. Her hands were sore from chest compressions and her muscles, ADHD from standing and moving non-stop. Still, there was something different in the way people looked at her that morning. Some eyes darted away quickly. Others held on too long, unreadable. No one smiled. No one spoke. She had barely taken a sip of the bitter coffee someone left in the pot when her name was paged over the intercom. Katie Bradley, please. Report to Administrative Office B12. The voice was neutral, professional, sterile, but the second she heard it, her stomach turned. Nurses didn't get called to that office unless something serious was happening. She threw her jacket over one arm and walked the long hallway, her shoes clicking softly against the tile floor, the sound oddly loud in the early stillness. Office B12 sat in a quieter wing of the hospital, removed from the clamor of the ER. The air conditioning was colder, the lights less harsh. When Katie knocked and stepped inside, she saw Sarah Kennedy seated at the end of a preveng rectangular table, a man in a dark suit next to her. She recognized him immediately. Dr. Alan Cross, the hospital's legal counsel. He was always polite, always professional, and never involved unless the risk department was preparing a response. Have a seat, Miss Bradley, Sarah said. Her voice was flat. No greeting, no emotion. Katie sat down slowly, keeping her posture straight, her hands resting in her lap. Her heart beat harder now. Not from fear, but from knowing exactly what this was. Dr. Cross adjusted his glasses. His eyes met hers for a moment, calm and unreadable. Sarah opened a folder in front of her and began to read. As you know, last night during your shift in the ER, you initiated medical intervention on a patient who had not yet been identified and whose condition involved potential federal oversight. Katie nodded. He was dying. Sarah looked up. That's not the point. The protocol exists for a reason. When a patient arrives in uniform without identification and may be connected to military or federal operations, we are required to pause treatment until we receive confirmation of jurisdiction. Katie's voice stayed even. He had a gunshot wound to the chest. He coded in front of me. If I had waited, he'd be dead. Sarah didn't flinch. That may be true, but the fact remains you acted outside the authority of your position. You overrode supervisory direction. You engaged staff without proper clearance, and you made a unilateral decision that exposed this hospital to legal and reputational liability. Katie turned to Dr. Cross. Is this really what we do now? Punish people for saving lives? He didn't speak right away. When he did, his voice was measured. Miss Bradley, I understand the circumstances were urgent, and I'm not here to pass moral judgment, but from a compliance standpoint, this is a serious breach. There are protocols. You bypass them. Her chest tightened. It wasn't surprise. It was disappointment, deep, bitter disappointment. She looked at him again, trying to find something in his face. He was black like her. He had to know what no man. It felt like to be second-guessed, outnumbered, held to a different standard. But in that room, none of it mattered. He was the system now. Sarah continued, effective immediately. You are placed on administrative leave. Pending formal review. We will be contacting HR to initiate an internal investigation. Do you have any questions? Katie swallowed hard. No, I understand. Good. You'll be escorted too. Collect your personal belongings. We ask that you not access any patient files or systems until further notice. She nodded again, stood up, and left the room. No one thanked her. No one even looked her in the eye. The hallway back to the ER felt longer than it had just an hour earlier. When she entered the staff lounge, it fell silent. A few co-workers looked her way, then quickly they looked back at their phones or their lunches or anything but her. Miguel, the nurse who had helped her the night before, opened his mouth like he might say something, but then he closed it and turned away. Katie didn't cry. She pulled her bag from her locker, grabbed the stethoscope she'd bought herself after passing her boards, and zipped it away like she was never coming back. As she walked past the nurse's station, someone cleared their throat. She didn't turn around. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the streets were still slick, reflecting the pale gray sky. Above, she stood for a moment on the Brechter sidewalk, holding her jacket in one hand, not sure where to go. She had come into work the night before, ready to save lives. She had done just that, and now she was unemployed. She reached into her coat pocket and felt the cold shape of the dog tag. She pulled it out, stared at the letters again. L. Holmes, U.S. Marine Corps. That man had been a stranger. No one knew his name. No one knew what had happened to him or why he had been found bleeding alone near the naval yard. But for those few minutes in the trauma bay, he had become her responsibility, and she had done what she was trained to do, what she believed in, what she knew was right. And yet, here she stood alone. Her heart pounded, not from fear anymore, but from something sharper. Anger, sadness, betrayal, all of it layered on top of each other in her chest. What hurt most wasn't the suspension. It wasn't even the silence in that office. It was the silence outside it, The people who had seen her act, who had watched her step, and in when no one else would. Where were they now? The ER ran on teamwork or so, they said. But when things got uncomfortable, that team disappeared. Katie looked back at the hospital once more. From the outside, it still looked like a place of healing. But inside, she had seen its lines too clearly. The rules that weren't about care, the hesitation that let people die, the way her skin color, her role, her lack of power, all added up to something the system didn't protect. She turned, walked away slowly, and didn't look back again. This was just the beginning. The apartment felt colder than usual, not because of the thermostat, but because silence had a weight to it, especially when you had nothing to say and nowhere to go. For 3 days, Katie Bradley didn't to leave her place except to take out the trash. She kept her phone on silent, ignored the few calls that came through, and let unread messages stack up in her inbox. She had a routine now. Wake up late, drink lukewarm coffee, stare at the television without registering what it was playing, and fall asleep on the propulsive to life couch with a blanket thrown across her knees. The hospital felt like another lifetime. Her scrub tops hung untouched in the closet, and the smell of antiseptic on her jacket was fading, replaced by the faint scent of dust and time. She held the dog tag more than she realized. Sometimes she would find it in her hand without remembering how it got there. Other times she would wake up with it clenched tightly in her fist, as if her body was afraid of letting it go, even when her mind wanted to forget. L. Holmes, U.S. Marine Corps. The name was still a mystery, the story incomplete, but the weight of that small piece of metal was almost unbearable. It reminded her that she had done the right thing. It also reminded her that doing the close right thing cost her everything. On the 4th morning, Katie sat in the kitchen, with the blinds half open. The light filtered in, dull and grey, but she didn't bother turning on the overhead lamp. She stared at the table. Her hands rested flat on the surface, motionless, until she reached over and pulled open the small drawer beneath the counter. She took out an old photo in a thin frame, the glass slightly cracked in the browned corner. It was her father standing tall, in front of the church they used to go to when she was a kid. He was wearing his Sunday suit and smiling that half smile he always wore when he didn't want to look too serious. She traced his face with her thumb. Her chest tightened. The last time she had seen him alive was in an ER much like hers, but that ER had been in the old county hospital, underfunded, understaffed, and deeply bureaucratic. He had collapsed at work from chest pain. A co-worker had driven him straight to the hospital, but he didn't have insurance. The front desk asked questions. The intake nurse hesitated. By the time someone called a doctor, his condition had worsened. She had been a nursing student at the time, still learning the ropes, shadowing real professionals, believing that care came first. That night shattered that illusion. Her father died in a hallway because no one wanted to be the one to break a rule, and she remembered watching a physician argue about liability while her mother sobbed in a plastic waiting room chair. The memory didn't fade over time. It settled deep in her like a splinter in the soul. It changed how she saw hospitals, how she saw systems, how she saw her place in them. She promised herself then that she would never be the one who waited. If she ever had the power, even the smallest amount, to intervene, she would, no matter the rule, no matter the risk. And now, all these years later, it had happened again. Another man left to die in a hallway, another person judged by and what they didn't have in their pocket. And this time, she did something. She stepped in. She fought back, and it still didn't matter. She put the photo frame down and looked at the dog tag again. Her grip tightened. She thought for a brief second about throwing it away, dropping it into the trash and walking away, like maybe that would take the weight off her chest. But her hand didn't move. Instead, she stood up, walked to the bedroom and opened a small box in the corner of her closet. Inside were old journals, letters she never mailed, and a few keepsakes. She placed the tag next to her father's obituary and closed the lid gently. By noon, the apartment was still quiet, but something had shifted. Katie sat down at her desk and opened her laptop. Her fingers hovered over the keys. She didn't open social media. She didn't open the hospital portal. Instead, she opened a blank document and began to type. She typed out everything that had happened that night, every second, every order given, and ignored every decision made. She didn't write it like a complaint. She didn't even write it like a defense. She wrote it like a report, a record, a testimony, not to prove it was right, but to remind herself that she hadn't imagined any of it. As the words filled the page, her pulse slowed. The act of writing became its own kind of medicine. She didn't know if anyone would read it, but that wasn't the point. She needed to put it somewhere, outside her own head. That night, Katie made dinner for the first time since her suspension. Nothing fancy, just soup and toast. But the act of chopping vegetables and watching them simmer in a pot felt grounding. It reminded her that she was still here, still capable of his attention, and like that 5 is now something tangible. She cleaned the kitchen, took out the trash, and for the first time in days, didn't sleep on the couch. In the morning, the sun was out. It wasn't warm, not yet, but the light was real. She opened the window just to crack and listen to the street below. People were walking, cars moving, the world spinning on without her. And yet, somehow she wasn't bitter. She had acted when no one else would. She had honored the promise she made to her father, and whatever came next, that would have to be enough for now. 6 weeks had passed since the hearing, and for the most part, Katie Bradley had settled into a Maniwan rhythm that could almost be called peace. She wasn't working, but she had found small ways to stay grounded. She cooked more often. She took long walks in the early mornings when the city was still quiet. She read the news, but only in small doses, and stayed away from anything that mentioned St. Vincent or ER policy. There were days when she could almost forget the tension that lived just under her skin, and there were nights when she slept straight through without dreaming about monitors, beeping or lives slipping away in silence. But on that particular morning, something felt different. The sun had barely crept above the rooftops, casting a pale yellow glow across her apartment walls. Katie was rinsing a coffee mug in the sink when the low, deliberate hum of engines caught her attention. Not the usual whir of traffic or the sputtering of delivery vans, but something heavier, more synchronized. She set the mug down, wiped her hands on a towel, and moved quietly toward the window. When she lifted the corner of the curtain, her breath caught for a second. Parked outside the entrance to her building were 3 black SUVs, the kind you didn't see unless something important or serious was happening. No lights flashing, no visible markings, just sleek dark vehicles lined up with surgical precision. Her first thought wasn't curiosity, it was dread. She stepped back from the window, heart thumping harder than it had in weeks. The only reason someone sent that kind of vehicle for a nurse on administrative leave was if something had gone very wrong. She replayed every possibility. Was there a new investigation? Had the patient died from complications? Was someone building a case she didn't know about? The knock on the door that followed wasn't loud, but it was firm, measured. She waited a beat before opening it. Standing in the blind hallway was a man in his late 30s, with short black hair, a trim beard, and a neat grey suit that looked federal, but not flashy. His badge wasn't visible, but his presence said everything. His voice was calm, polite, but it didn't leave room for questions. Mr. Bradley, he said, giving her a small nod. Mr. Harold Holmes has requested to meet with you. We'd like to escort you to him now. Katie blinked. Harold Holmes, the chairman. The man offered no reaction beyond a slight tilt of his head. Yes, ma'am. Am I in trouble? His answer came without hesitation. I'm not at liberty to say, but your cooperation is appreciated. She looked over her shoulder as if the walls of her apartment might offer some advice, then stepped out and pulled the door shut behind her. Her fingers trembled slightly as she locked it. On the ride down in the elevator, she clutched her bag to her chest like it might shield her. The man didn't speak again. Neither did the driver of the SUV that opened its doors as soon as she stepped outside. The interior was immaculate, dark leather, cool air-tinted windows. She sat in the back alone while the man took the seat beside the driver. No one said a word. The city passed by in silence. Familiar buildings blurred into a sequence of concrete and glass. It wasn't until they turned toward the financial district that she began to realize they weren't taking her to a courthouse or a police precinct. They pulled into a private entrance behind a glass, tall, modern structure. She recognized, almost immediately, Street Vincent's Executive Administration Building. The SUV glided into an underground lot. Katie followed the man through a quiet hallway, her steps echoing off the polished floors. The lights were colder here, clinical, untouched by the chaos of the ER. Everything about this part of the hospital was designed for order, for power. They entered an elevator with no buttons. The man held a badge up to a badge, a light, small panel, and the doors closed silently. When they opened again, they stepped into a reception area that looked more like a luxury law office than part of a hospital. A woman in a navy suit stood as they approached. Miss Bradley, she said with a warm but rehearsed smile. Mr. Holmes will see you now. The room they entered was understated but elegant. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the skyline. Dark wood furniture. A single painting hung behind the desk. Something abstract, inexpensive looking. At the far end of the room, standing with one hand resting on a cane and the other tucked into his pocket, was Harold Holmes. He turned when they entered. Late 6, Zero's white sharp features and a presence that didn't need volume to ability to command attention. His gaze met hers without blinking. Miss Bradley, he said, walking toward her at a slow but steady pace. Thank you for coming. She tried to read him, but his expression was a wall. She nodded, unsure of what to say. I'm sure you're wondering why. You're here? Yes, sir. Her voice was steady, but her pulse was quickening. He gestured to a small sitting area by the speak window. They both Saturday. He leaned slightly on the cane as he lowered himself into the chair. The man you treated that night, the one everyone wanted you to ignore. That was my son. The room seemed to shrink. Katie's breath hitched just a fraction, but it was enough. Her mind raced through every detail of that night. The bullet wound, the chaos, the decision to act. She had known he was important. She had not known this. I didn't know his name until, after she said quickly, I believe you, he replied. That's not why you're here. He paused, eyes fixed on her. You saved my son's life. When others hesitated, you acted. I won't forget that. Relief started to creep in, but it didn't last. However, he continued, I also believe in the integrity of institutions. We built systems for a sense reason. If every nurse took it upon themselves to rewrite protocol, the consequences would be far-reaching. Katie felt the air leave her lungs slowly. Of course, gratitude, but no vindication. So, you're not here to clear me, she said. Not a question. Holmes didn't flinch. No, I'm here to look you in the eye and say that what you did mattered, even if the system can't acknowledge it the way it should. She wanted to be angry. She wanted to stand up and leave, but part of her knew this was the most she would get from someone like him. Not apology, not justice, just acknowledgement. "Thank you," she said, quietly. He nodded once. "You can expect contact from human resources within the week. No guarantees, but there may be a path forward." He stood up, offered his hand. She shook it. The escort led her, back through the same silent hallways, out to the waiting SUV. This time, as they pulled away, she looked out the window and allowed herself to feel one small, solid thing. This was not the end. It was the start of something she didn't yet have a name for. The elevator hadn't even touched the lobby when the doors suddenly reopened. Katie had been preparing to leave the building in silence, maybe to breathe fresh air and try to process the meeting with Harold Holmes. But what she saw when the doors slid back was not expected. A man stood there waiting alone in the hallway, leaning slightly on a dark oak cane. His blonde hair was neatly trimmed, and though his skin was still a little pale, he looked more alive than she could have imagined. He wore a grey jacket over a pressed button-down, and his eyes still, blue and steady, locked with hers the moment they met. Her breath caught in her throat. It was him, Lincoln Holmes, the man she had fought for in trauma. Room 3, the man she had saved. He took a pressed single step forward, the cane clicking softly against the polished floor. "Katie," he said, his voice low, clear, and direct. "Can we talk for a minute?" She nodded without a word. The agent beside her glanced at Lincoln, then at her, but made no move to intervene. Lincoln gestured toward a small conference room down the hall. "It's quiet in here. I asked them to hold it." They entered the room. It was modest, just a round table, 4 chairs, a window half covered by blinds that filtered the late afternoon light. Lincoln pulled out a chair for her, then sat opposite. His movements were careful, still healing, but his energy carried a quiet determination. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Katie studied him, not the uniform or the wounds, but the eyes. He looked younger than she had imagined. At first, early, 30 seconds perhaps, but there was depth there, the kind of depth born not just from pain, but from having witnessed something he could never unsee. She remembered the blood, the way his chest had collapsed, the seconds when his heart had stopped. Now here he was sitting upright, breathing, blinking, and looking directly at her, as though she was the only person in the building who mattered. "I wanted to thank you in person," he said, finally breaking the mention. Silence. "I know people say that all this time. I know you're probably tired of hearing it, but this isn't polite. This is real. You saved my life." Katie shifted slightly. "You would have done the same for someone else. It's just what we do." He shook his head. "Maybe, but I saw the reports. I saw what happened after. The silence, the suspension, the way they left you, hanging because you refused to let me die." His voice didn't waver, but there was something burning behind it, something held in for too long. "You didn't wait for clearance. You didn't freeze like the others did. You knew you'd get in trouble, and you still acted. I owe you everything, and yet they tossed you aside like you were disposable." Katie looked down at her, hands, fingers curled together in her lap. "They said I violated protocol, that I put the hospital at legal risk. They didn't care who you were, just that I moved without permission." Lincoln leaned forward, his tone sharper now. "Let's be honest. If you were white, this would be a completely different conversation. They'd be giving you an award, not a termination letter. My father won't say it out loud, but I will. This wasn't just about procedure. It was about perception. And you didn't fit the picture they wanted." Her eyes flicked up to meet his. There was no pity in his expression, just truth, raw and unapologetic. "I didn't even know your name until they printed it on the fold. Release form," she said softly. "I just saw a patient who was dying. I did what I was trained to do. What I had to do, he nodded slowly. I believe you. That's exactly why I need to do something. What do you mean? She asked, narrowing her eyes slightly. He exhaled, setting both hands on the table. I'm filing for an internal review with the board. I want a hearing on record. I want to testify. You're serious. Dead serious. Katie sat back in her chair, trying to process. They'll listen to you because of who you are. Lincoln offered a grim smile. Exactly. And I'm going to use that. I may not know hospital politics, but I know when someone's being punished for being brave. You didn't just save me. You stood up when others hesitated. That should mean something. The tension in the room shifted. It was still thick, but no longer suffocating. Katie leaned forward, her voice lower, now more vulnerable. Your father doesn't want this. He made that clear. He thanked me, but he won't clear me. He said the system has to stay intact. Lincoln scoffed. My father cares more about structure than people. Always has. I grew up in a house full of rules. Nothing personal. Everything by the book. But that book almost got me killed. He paused, then added, I'm not my father. Katie looked at him differently then, not just as a former patient, not even as the son of the hospital's most powerful man, but as someone willing to go against the grain for what was right. She had spent the past 6 weeks feeling like she was shouting into a void, and now, for the first time, someone was shouting back with her. If you really do this, she said slowly, you'll be putting yourself in the crosshairs. He nodded. I know. But this time, I get to fight for someone who fought for me first. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was heavy with mutual understanding. No, one needed to say how rare this moment was or how fragile, but it was real, and that was enough. Lincoln stood up first. Katie followed. He extended his hand. She took it. Whatever happens next, he said, I want you to know I'm with you, not because I owe you, but because it's right. Katie nodded. Then, let's make sure they finally listen. When she stepped out of the room and into the hallway, something in her posture had changed. Her shoulders were still tired, but no longer slumped. Her chin lifted a little higher, not because she had won anything yet, but because she wasn't alone anymore. Outside, the sun was finally breaking through the clouds, pouring gold over the concrete. And for the first time in a long time, Katie Bradley walked out of a building, not as a dismissed nurse, not as a symbol, but as someone finally seen by the one life that had every reason to forget her and chose not to. Part 6. The footage that spoke, it began quietly. Just a few clicks, a few shares, a few late-night murmurs between hospital staff who thought no one was listening. But by the next morning, the clip had already crossed state lines. The footage came from a security camera mounted high above the trauma bay at St. Vincent. The angle was grainy, the audio faint but clear enough. It captured the moment, frozen in time when Katie Bradley stood at the foot of a nearly dying man, shouting across a room that had frozen, in fear. If he dies, while we wait for authorization, how do we explain that to his family? Who do we answer? To policies or people? Her voice cracked in the recording. Not with fear, but with fury, controlled but cutting. It was not the voice of insubordination. It was the voice of someone trying to keep a man from dying while others hid behind silence and paperwork. The internet didn't see protocol. The internet saw the principle, and the internet does not forget. By midday, hashtags began to spread. Number Nurse Bradley #policy or people #letter work. The clip appeared first on a small healthcare forum, then jumped to Reddit, where one user posted, "She broke a rule to save a safe life. That should be the standard, not a violation." Within hours, the post hit The front page. Facebook pages started sharing it. Twitter lit up. Comment sections exploded with outrage, confusion, disbelief. At first, Katie didn't know. She hadn't turned on the television, hadn't logged in anywhere. But when her phone buzzed repeatedly on the kitchen table, she finally checked. Dozens of messages, screenshots, missed calls. Her name was everywhere. One message from her former colleague, Tanya, simply said, "You didn't just speak for him that night. You spoke for all of us." Another unsigned, "Would it, they have fired you if your skin was lighter." She stared at her phone hands, motionless eyes heavy. The room felt distant, like she wasn't in it, like none of this was real. But it was real, too real. The internet had taken her quiet act and turned it into a symbol. She didn't ask for this. She didn't want it. Later that day, as if summoned by the sudden storm of attention, a knock came at her door. A short woman in her early 30s stood outside holding a leather-bound notebook, a camera bag, slung over one shoulder, Asian American, sharp, brown eyes, a calm voice that didn't push too hard. "Miss Bradley, I'm Ruby Chen. I work with MedLens. It's an independent healthcare accountability outlet. I'm not here to ask about the Marine. I'm here to ask why you're not working right now." Katie didn't answer. At first, she just stepped back and let Ruby inside. They sat in the kitchen. The coffee was already cold in the pot. Ruby didn't launch into a monologue. She didn't flash credentials. She simply said, "We've been tracking internal disciplinary records for hospitals across the Northeast. Did you know that, in the last 5 years, over 70% of staff suspended for procedural violations at St. Vincent were people of color, and that of those, only one was ever reinstated?" Katie blinked. Her lips parted slightly, then closed again. Ruby nodded as if reading her thoughts. "I'm not saying it's on paper, but you don't need it to be on paper for it to be real. We see it in patterns, in silence, in who gets protected and who gets punished. You want me to do an Accenture interview?" Katie said, "Not a question, a resignation. I want you to tell the truth, however much of it you're ready to tell," Ruby replied. Her tone didn't carry pressure, only a strange, quiet solidarity. At first, Katie refused. She didn't want a microphone in her face. She didn't want to be a martyr. But that evening, as the sun went down over her modest apartment, she opened her inbox. Again, one message changed her mind. He was from a nurse she hadn't spoken to in nearly 3 years. A black woman now and working in Detroit. It read, "I saw the clip. I remember the day I froze during a code. You were the only one who told me it was okay to mess up as long as I followed it. Kept showing up. You told me I was seen. Please don't stop now. We need this. We need you." The next morning, Ruby returned. They didn't film in a studio. Just at Katie's kitchen table, a single lamp beside her casting a soft light. There was no makeup, no lighting crew, just a small camera and a recorder. "We can keep it tight," Ruby said. "Just your words. No commentary, no music. Just you." Katie nodded. She looked down at Nisatijan, her hands, then into the camera. The voice didn't shake. "I didn't know who he was. I still don't know why he was left, where he was, but I knew he was dying, and when no one moved, I did. Not because I wanted to break rules, because I wanted him to live." The video was under 4 minutes long. It went online, with a title that simply read, "Nurse. Katie Bradley breaks silence." In 2 days, it reached over 1 million views. Comment sections filled with support. Retired nurses from Maine, former patients, paramedics, even military veterans. Some said they'd seen too many die waiting for permission. Some said they remembered Katie from clinical rotations. But the most powerful comments came from those who had never met her. She didn't see rank or ID. She saw a human being. That's what medicine is supposed to be. Every hospital in the country should have a Katie Bradley. Still, the hospital said nothing. No statement, no apology, no investigation. Launched. In the absence of institutional response, Ruby dug deeper. She published a short article tracking past incidents of disciplinary action at St. Vincent. Names redacted but patterns visible. She showed how white nurses with similar violations were typically given warnings or reassigned. Meanwhile, minority staff were either suspended or dismissed. The article, titled "Procedure Over People," began, circulating in healthcare circles, academic forums, even a few political newsletters. It didn't accuse, it didn't scream, it simply stated facts. And in doing so, it raised more questions than any press release ever could. At home, Katie watched the reaction unfold like someone watching herself in a stranger's dream. She wasn't proud. She wasn't angry. She was tired. Deep in her chest, beneath the whirlwind of exposure, lived a quiet ache. The ache of knowing the callous world only listened when it had a screen and a scandal. Still, when Tanya called and said, "They're going to have to respond now, they can't pretend anymore," Katie didn't disagree. She, just said, "I hope they don't wait for someone else to die first." That night, she pulled the folded dog tag from the drawer again, ran her thumb over the name L. Holmes, still scratched, still blood-stained, still hers. She didn't know what came next. But for the first time since the night Lincoln Holmes landed on her stretcher, she wasn't alone. Her voice had reached beyond the white walls of the trauma bay, and the world was listening. The hearing was scheduled for Friday morning. It wasn't open to the public. There were no news, cameras, or journalists waiting in the hallway. The hospital had made sure of that. On paper, it was simply a human resources review meeting. In reality, it was a firewall, an attempt to contain the fallout after the footage of Katie Bradley's ER defiance had gone viral, and public pressure was mounting. The night before, she hadn't slept. She had laid down in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying everything again and again. The moment she grabbed the gauze, the nurse who hesitated, the sound of the flatline, the weight of Lincoln's blood in her gloves. None of that changed the fact that she was the one being judged. Katie arrived early. She wore simple navy scrubs and a Gevarant, clean white lab coat. No makeup, no jewelry. Her badge had long been revoked, but she still clipped her old ID to her coat out of habit. It didn't beep at the door anymore. She was led in by security. Her footsteps echoed too, loudly in the empty corridor outside. Conference room 14. Lincoln Holmes was already inside when she entered. He sat, stiff-backed at the end of a long oak table, dressed in civilian clothes, but his military posture intact. His cane rested against the side of the chair, untouched. Across from him were Sarah Kennedy, wearing a perfectly pressed black blazer, and Dr. Alan Cross, seated next to her with his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Katie took the chair at the center, between the parties. A legal assistant from the hospital HR department stood at the corner shuffling papers without looking anyone in the eye. Sarah cleared her throat first. "Miss Bradley, thank you for coming. We want to begin by acknowledging the public response to recent events. The board has reviewed footage reports and medical records related to the night in question." Katie stayed silent. Sarah continued, measured and calm. "It's important we recognize the complexity of what occurred. While your intentions were not in question, your methods did not align with federal or institutional protocol." Lincoln scoffed under his breath. "It was just loud enough." Sarah glanced at him. "Mr. Holmes, you'll have time to speak." He didn't respond, just folded his hands over his stomach and stared straight ahead. Dr. Cross spoke next. "Katie, There's no dispute about the result. You saved a life. But when a patient enters the ER without identification and potential military or federal ties, our standard protocol is to stabilize and hold. You bypass that. He didn't sound accusatory. If anything, his tone bordered on weary. Katie finally spoke, her voice low but clear. He would have died before stabilization. There wasn't time to hold. Sarah's fingers tapped against her folder. That's a medical judgment, not a procedural one. Lincoln shifted in his seat. That judgment saved my life. Dr. Cross nodded slowly but said nothing. Sarah ignored the interruption. Let's be honest about what this is. We're not here to assign blame. We're here to assess whether actions taken outside the protocol can be tolerated without consequence. If we allow that line to move, we lose institutional integrity. Katie took a breath, steadying the shake in her hands beneath the table. If the man I saved hadn't been Lincoln Holmes, would I even be sitting in this room right now? The room fell into a silence that stretched too long. Sarah looked away for a second, as if adjusting her blazer. Dr. Cross leaned forward, his voice almost a whisper. That's not something we can measure. Katie held his gaze. No, but you feel it, don't you? Sarah finally responded, cool and professional. The board has reached a decision based on the totality of the circumstances, including the outcome, the risk, and the procedural violations. We are ruling that your actions were ethically commendable but procedurally incorrect. Lincoln leaned forward. What does that mean? Sarah folded her hands. It means no reinstatement, no formal recognition, no apology, but also no black mark on Izai, your record. So, nothing. Lincoln's voice cracked slightly. You're telling me the nurse who saved my life gets a neutral verdict because the rule book couldn't keep up with the emergency? Mr. Holmes, Sarah's voice was firmer now, you are emotionally involved. That's understandable, but not determinative. Katie stood. Her legs felt heavy, her shoulders stiff, but her voice didn't waver. I didn't come here expecting applause, but I hoped someone in this building would admit that doing the right thing should matter more than me doing the expected thing. She didn't wait for a response. She turned and walked out. Lincoln hesitated for a moment, then stood and followed her, without a word. In the hallway, his footsteps caught up with hers. That was a joke. All of it. She stopped at the elevator and looked at him. No, it was. The system working exactly the way at Menbury it was built to. He exhaled hard, leaning slightly on the cane. Now you're not giving up, are you? She pressed the down button. I gave up, expecting fairness. That's not the same thing. The elevator arrived. She stepped in. Lincoln held the door open. If they won't give you your job back, I will. Katie looked at him, eyebrows drawn. What do you mean? Come work for me. My father still runs half the hospital, even if he pretends not to. I can get you in. Not as a symbol, as a nurse. She shook her head. See, Comsten, I'm not interested in being anyone's favor. He didn't push, just nodded once, and let the door close. Outside, the world looked the same. Grey sky, distant, hum of traffic. But something had shifted. Katie stood on the curb for a flash. Long time, watching people walk in and out of the hospital she used to belong to. She wasn't angry anymore. Not really, just tired of fighting for every inch. She pulled her coat tighter and walked away. No one stopped her. No one called her name. But in her pocket, the dog tag was still there. Cold, solid, a reminder that not all lives saved get celebrated, and not all victories come with a parade. It came quietly, with no fanfare, no grand reversal, and certainly no apology, just an email from the hospital's HR department, no subject line, no Greeting. Only a 1 sentence notice. You are welcome to resume your position, if you choose. Starting date, Monday. There was no mention of the investigation, no acknowledgement of wrongdoing, no restoration of title or reputation, but it was real. A door reopened, not because someone had taken a stand for her, but because the system, trying to quiet the growing noise, needed to appear fair without having to admit failure. Rumors had begun to circulate among staff that the hospital was facing scrutiny, not just from the media, but from professional boards. A quiet vote had taken place inside the nursing administrative wing. A compromise reached. Katie Bradley would be reinstated as a floor nurse in the ER, but under the guise of a new hire. Sarah Kennedy didn't block it, but she didn't endorse it either. She simply let the matter pass to legal and remained hands off. Katie read the message twice, then closed her laptop. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She just sat at her kitchen table and breathed. It wasn't vindication. It wasn't justice, but it was a chance. She walked through the staff entrance of St. Vincent on that Monday morning with her old badge, reprinted and clipped to a fresh set of scrubs. There was no announcement, no welcome back. The familiar beeping of machines and sterile smell of antiseptic met her like they always had, as if nothing had ever happened. But everything had. The ER hadn't changed, but she had. She stepped into the break room, where a few nurses looked up, briefly, then returned to their Zyne conversations. Some gave her polite nods. Others avoided eye contact. A few, she sensed, still carried resentment or discomfort. Not everyone had agreed with her return. That was fine. She hadn't come for them. She came for the work. Her first shift back started slow. She checked supplies, reviewed patient charts, helped prep rooms. She moved through the space like muscle memory, precise but cautious, as if relearning a language she once spoke fluently. When the first trauma came in a car accident, victim with a suspected spinal injury, Katie responded quickly, stepping into the role as if no time had passed. She offered support where needed, didn't overstep, and let the attending nurse lead. There was no need to prove anything, not anymore. In the following weeks, she focused on her patients. Quietly, steadily, she became a presence again in the ER. She stayed late when others went home. She offered to train new nurses on triage, best practices, and gently corrected protocol errors without condescension. Slowly, grudgingly, some colleagues began to warm again. A few even sought her out for advice. Not all, but enough. She never brought up what happened, never mentioned Lincoln Holmes, or the board hearings, or the viral clip. When asked, she deflected with a shrug, or changed the subject. The story might have defined her outside the hospital, but inside she let her actions speak. She had been painted as a symbol, but Katie Bradley never wanted to be anyone's martyr. She just wanted to be a good nurse. And now, quietly, she was becoming one again. The morning the staff vote was set to take place, the sky over St. Vincent was a soft, steely grey. A calm hush hung in the air, as if the building itself was holding its breath. Word had already spread, quietly but steadily, that Katie Bradley was among the names being considered for the new head nurse of the emergency department. The thought alone had stirred quiet debates across hallways and behind break room doors. Some said she was a hero. Others whispered she had only become a symbol because of the scandal. But none could deny one simple truth. Ever since she had returned, things had changed. Katie arrived an hour early. Her steps were steady, her posture upright, but inside her chest was tight with restraint. She had not campaigned. She had not lobbied. She had simply worked day after day, long nights, back-to-back shifts, mentoring junior nurses, quietly adjusting flawed protocols that had gone untouched for years. She never raised her voice. She didn't need to. Her work spoke for itself. Still, this vote wasn't about merit alone. It never was. Not in places where politics and hierarchy quietly ruled. The conference room filled, slowly. Doctors, senior nurses, administrators. Some nodded at Katie as they entered. A few offered tight smiles. Others avoided eye contact altogether. Sarah Kennedy sat at the end of the table, composed as always, her fingers laced neatly on the wood. She didn't speak to Katie, not out of hostility, but habit. They existed now, in a professional truce, cordial, distant. Just before the meeting began, an assistant entered with a tablet. "We received a video message," she announced, "from someone requesting it be played before the vote." There was a pause. Then Sarah gave a subtle nod. "Proceed." The lights dimmed. A moment later, Lincoln Holmes appeared on the screen. He was seated dressed in a simple dark sweater. The backdrop a plain living room wall, but his tone was calm, intentional. "My name is Lincoln Holmes. Some of you know my name because of what happened that night. But what matters more is whose name you heard first. Katie Bradley. I wasn't supposed to survive. The odds were clear. The injuries were extensive. I was unconscious, broken, and alone. But she stepped in. Not because anyone told her to, not because there were cameras, but because she knew what to do, and no one else was willing to do it. Since then, I've learned that courage in the moment is one thing, but standing tall after the world turns its back on you, that takes a different kind of strength. Katie didn't fight to be a present hero. She showed up over and over, quietly, expertly, relentlessly. You don't have to believe me. Look at her. Work, talk to the staff, review the changes in that ER. You'll see she hasn't waited for a title to lead. She is already leading. All I'm asking is that you call it what it is." The screen faded to black. No one said a word. Katie felt her throat tighten, not from pride, but from something deeper, a mix of gratitude, humility, and sheer emotional fatigue. She hadn't expected that. She hadn't asked for it. But hearing Lincoln's voice, clear, firm, and filled with truth, made something inside her settle. No matter the outcome, someone had seen. The vote proceeded, quietly, efficiently. No long debates, no speeches, just slips of paper folded, marked, and dropped into a box. An hour later, Katie sat alone in the nurses' lounge, sipping from a paper cup of kind of so lukewarm coffee. Her palms were damp. Her scrubs felt tight at the collar. His room was quiet. Then the door opened. Dr. Cross stepped in, holding a light mimosa. Sealed envelope, his expression unreadable. "It's official," he said, offering her the envelope. She hesitated. "You were voted in," he continued, "by a margin no one could argue with." Katie blinked. He gave her a rare, warm smile. "Welcome, Head Nurse Bradley." Relief didn't come like a wave. It came like a slow breath. She exhaled for the first time in days, maybe weeks. She didn't jump, didn't cry. She simply nodded, clutching the envelope to her chest. Later that afternoon, Katie stood outside the ER entrance as sunlight began breaking through the clouds. Nurses moved briskly behind her. Patients came and went. The hospital hummed with its usual rhythm. She closed her eyes, letting the wind brush past her face. It hadn't been handed to her. It hadn't been forced. It had been earned every hour, every shift, every choice to keep showing up. She turned back toward the doors. It was time to go. Back in. This time, not just as a nurse, but as a leader. The emergency department had settled into the thick rhythm of midweek chaos. Sirens outside flared and faded. The waiting room buzzed with low murmurs and impatient glances. Inside the trauma bay, fluorescent lights hummed steadily. Overhead, Katie Bradley moved through it, all with a quiet authority that no longer required explanation. Her white coat bore no extra shine. Her nameplate was the same size as everyone else's, but the way she walked, the way people moved slightly to make space as she passed told the story better than any title. A call came through the intercom. Pediatric code blue. The team snapped into motion as they wheeled in a boy no older than 7, his skin pale, his chest rising in quick, shallow gasps. A young nurse, new not long out of school, stood frozen by the side of the stretcher. Her hands trembled. The intubation kit rattled slightly in her grip. She was the assigned lead for this trauma, part of the hospital's new mentorship program. Katie had pushed through herself, but now, face-to-face with reality, the nurse looked paralyzed. Katie didn't bark orders. She didn't step in and take over. She walked to the nurse's side, gently laid a hand on her shoulder, and bent slightly to meet her eye. "You're okay," she said, calmly. "Breathe one step at a time. You know what to do." The nurse blinked, swallowed hard, then gave a slight nod. Her grip steadied together. They worked. Katie didn't take over, but she was there for every movement. A nod when the position was correct. A gentle tap when to adjust. The boy stabilized. The room relaxed. A quiet round of acknowledgements passed through the team as the boy was moved to post-T trauma observation. After the case, the young nurse stepped into the hallway, leaned against the wall, and exhaled hard. "I thought I was going to fail him." She said more to herself than anyone. Katie joined, her standing shoulder. "We all have that moment. First time I did it, I forgot to even check the airway before suction." The nurse looked up, surprised. "It's not about never freezing," Katie continued. "It's about learning how to thaw faster, each time." The nurse gave a soft laugh. "Thank you for not stepping in, but for being there." Katie nodded once. "You'll do fine. Keep showing up." Back in her office, the shift buzzed on outside her door. Papers rustled under her fingers as she reviewed chart notes and rotated, staffing for the weekend ahead. Her desk was organized not obsessively, but with purpose. On the shelf above it sat a simple black frame. Inside it, the old dog tag L. Holmes, U.S. Marine, rested against a neutral background. No plaque, no explanation. She looked at it for a fangs of Nine's cognizance moment, not out of nostalgia, not even gratitude, just acknowledgement. That night had changed everything, not just because of the act itself, but because it forced her to confront the system, herself, and the choice to stay in a profession that had once thrown her away. But she had stayed, not for redemption, not even for justice. She stayed for moments like today. The knock at the door was soft. "Come in," she said. It was Maria, one of the nurses. She had helped train over the past year. "Sorry to bother you. Just wanted to let you know we updated the trauma checklist. We included your suggestion about IV prioritization order. Thought you'd like to know it got signed off." Katie smiled. "Thanks for letting me know. Good work." Maria hesitated. "Also that new intern, Yvonne," she said. You being there today made her feel like she wasn't alone. "That matters. Just thought you should hear that too." Katie nodded. "Tell her I said she did well." Maria left and Katie turned back to her notes. The hallway sounds blended into a quiet hum again. No one clapped. No one made speeches. But the work went on, and she was at the center of it, not commanding attention, but anchoring the room. She reached up, adjusted the dog tag slightly so it sat even in the frame. Then she picked up her pen and continued writing. Outside her office, a nurse called for assistance in triage. Katie stood, pocketed her pen, and opened the door. "On my way," she said, and just like that, she stepped back into the rhythm of her day. No music swelled, no spotlight found her, but the palm story had come full circle. Not with applause, but with continuity, with presence. She had become exactly what she needed most back then. Not a savior, not a headline, but a hand on the shoulder, a voice of calm, a leader who stood close quietly while others learned how to stand tall. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. What you've just witnessed isn't just a story about hospital walls and protocols. It's about courage that doesn't need to shout about, quiet strength that refuses to back down, and about those unseen heroes who keep showing up even when no one is watching. If you've ever felt invisible for doing the right thing or carried the weight of conservative justice on your own shoulders, then, maybe in Katie's journey, you saw a part of your own. Where are you watching this from? We'd love to know where in the world this story found you, and what part of it stayed with you. Tell us how Mother Died Team made you feel. Share what justice means to you, and if it moved you, even just a little, don't keep it to yourself. Let someone else know they're not alone, because sometimes the quietest stories carry the loudest truths. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.